What's up everyone, welcome to Hayden's DIY Builds, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a shoe shelf. So it's kind of similar to a cubby shelf, except for it'll be a little bit smaller, as in width wise, but about reasonable height. So I'm taking the leftover wood that I have and I'm going to build me a shelf for my shoes because I'm tired of my shoe boxes just like stacked up downstairs. So I'm gonna show you guys in a second exactly what that looks like. Okay, so let me show you guys. So as you guys can see right now, all of my shoe boxes are just like sitting here and I'm just tired of them looking like this. All right, so even though I have some type of organization, I want to put them in like a cubby hole shelf. So I'm pretty much going to take the leftover wood that I have and then transform this area to make it look a lot more organizable. Organized. That's not organizable. Organized. All right, so let's get to it. All right, so I'm going to show you guys the type of wood that I'm going to be using. So pretty much it's some leftover pine wood that I use to build my gym power rack. So right here I have a 36-inch wood board, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it down to 2 feet so I can only get obviously 1 2-foot board out of here, and I'm going to use the rest of the wood and I'm going to make these blocks right here, which are going to be my stacks for building the shelves for the shoe. Okay, so as you saw in the beginning of the video, shows you my little layout. Right here is going to be 2 feet by 20 feet high. It might actually be a little bit higher depending on how much wood I have left over, so let's see. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that all the pieces are cut down. So these blocks that I have right here, there are 5.5 inches long. So I'm going to approximately need, let's see, 2, 4, 6. I'm going to need 18. So I'm going to need 18 5.5 inch blocks. Okay. So as you see here, this one's not 5.5 inch blocks. So I'm taking the leftover scrap wood I have here, and I'm going to cut these down to 5.5 inch blocks. Okay. So then I'm going to take the leftover wood that I have, the one I just showed you, 36-inch one, I'm going to cut it down to 2 feet. And don't worry, I'm going to put this all down in the description down below, okay? So, and you can adjust this however you want. I'm just simply going off of the wood that I have and trying to make the most out of it. So, and then I have some other leftover wood over here that I'm going to use and make some more blocks. So I'll be able to essentially make a little bit more space. So as you saw, I have about like 25 issues. So my goal is to make as many shelves as possible, all right, with the wood that I have. So without further ado, let's get it. All right, guys, so now what I'm doing is that I have the wood all laid out. I'm taking the blocks and I am measuring them so that way I can cut the 5.5 inches blocks to make our stack, so we can stack the shelves up on top of each other. So I'm using the measuring tape, as you can see, 5.5 inches, and we're going to go through and make marks on the wood, so that way all we have to do is go back and cut where we marked. Then for step 2, we're going to take our boards that are 2 feet long and trace it on the outside and prepare for it to be cut later on, and then use the rest of the wood of a 36-foot board, and we're going to make as many cuts as we can to get our 5.5 inch blocks out of that. All right, before you start to cut anything, for anybody who is new to trying to start DIY projects, you always want to make sure that you verify your measurements, because once you cut, you can't go back. And being that I am working with a limited amount of wood to make these shelves to begin with, I'm going to make sure that I verify my cuts, I verify my measurements, and then we're going to cut our 2-inch boards and then work to cut our blocks. Now, just like anything that you will be using or operating on, you always want to make sure that we are practicing safety. So for anybody who's not used to using any type of mechanical tools, i.e. a saw, you always want to make sure that you're wearing eye pro. Now, I know in this video, I'm not wearing any eye pro or eye protection to protect from the sand blowing back in my eyes, but I have my garage door open to kind of help with the wood chips flying everywhere. So just be sure you guys are wearing some type of eye safety and maybe some gloves as well, so you don't get any type of splinters or cut yourself. Some of this wood is already pre-sanded down, so I wasn't too concerned about getting any cuts. But if you are concerned about that, you might want to make sure that you wear some gloves. All right, guys, so the next thing we're going to do, we're going to sand down the blocks, and I'm going to be using 120 grit sandpaper, and we're going to smooth out all the edges on all four corners. And I'm using the Ryobi tool that you can get from your local store, that is at Lowe's, at Home Depot. I'm going to drop a link down in the description. So we're going to take all of them. I'm going to make sure we go around all the edges and top of the surface just a little bit, because we don't want to make it round, just enough to clean up the little wood splints on the side of each block. All right, now that we have sanded the blocks, our next step for us is to pre-drill our holes. So just like any wood project, you always want to pre-drill your holes to make sure that the wood doesn't splint or break. But because I'm using pine lumber, the chances of it splitting is highly unlikely. So when I'm pre-drilling my holes at the edge of the board, it's going to be approximately about ½ inch away from the board, and that's to make sure that the screw that I'm using doesn't splint through close to the edge. So we're going to go through, measure 1½ inches, and then 10 inches from the first hole, and to make the stacks in the center of the board. So they're going to be 10 inches apart on the center of the board, as you will see. All right, so now that we have our first board pre-drilled, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next boards, and we're going to pre-drill our holes in here. So again, there's going to be 6 holes all together. They're going to be ½ inch away from the board, and in the center, ½ inch away from the center, and they're going to be approximately 10 inches apart from the first hole. So make sure that you measure so that way they're in the center of your board. Now, if you're going to be using a longer board to build a longer shelf, then obviously that you're going to want to make sure that if it's like 24 feet, the center hole is going to be 12 inches, just to give you guys an example. After you've already completed your pre-drills, you're going to go ahead and apply the screws. Now, the screws I'm going to be using for these shelves are some leftover 2½ inch screws. So it's enough to put them both together. And the way I'm doing it so that these screws don't show, I'm putting holes at the bottom of the board to attach the first piece, and then at the top, just slightly cant it over to the right to attach the next ones. Now, another important tip that I wanted to add for all beginners who are new to working with wood tools and screwing and so forth for DIY projects, when you are drilling in your screws, it's very important to make sure that the screw is straight on, or if not, what'll happen is that the screw will go in slanted, and if you don't have enough wood space to work with, it can possibly splint out and go through the entire piece of wood. Now, again, like I said, for this pine lumber that I am using, splitting is highly unlikely because of the thickness and how durable it is. But that doesn't mean if I don't have my angle right that it won't go through the wood. Now, the wood that's in the ground on the floor, what I did was I went ahead and I applied wood glue in between the wood blocks, the stacks, before I attached the shelves on there to provide a more structure to keep it more sturdy. Now, it's not going to come apart if you just only use screws, but I like to use the wood glue and along with screws just to keep it together and stable. Now, I used my dumbbells to keep it in place to allow the wood glue to set. Now, normally I will typically let it sit overnight, but because this is a smaller project, it doesn't require a long time for the glue to sit. So if you have wood clamps that'll reach out as far as the width on there, then you can use your wood clamps, but the wood clamps I have don't. So I'm just improvising and using my dumbbells instead. All right, so now that we have already attached our blocks, what we're going to do is we're going to pre-drill some more holes into kind of the center of the board. So it's approximately about 3 inches from the edge of the wood. And we're going to attach another shelf on top of there. Now, because I didn't have a lot of wood left, I had to shorten down the very top shelf. So as we pre-drill those holes on the top, we're going to then go back and we're going to pre-drill more holes so that way we can attach the bottom shelf. Now, the way I built this shelf based on the wood that I had left, I made it so that you could detach it. So pretty much you could put the top on the bottom shelf and then you could remove it without taking any screws out, and you could put it somewhere else in your house or wherever you're going to be storing your shoes. So just in case if you wanted to have a small one by the front door, you could have a small one by the front door, and you could put another one maybe in your bedroom or anywhere else in your house. So now with the last and top final board, what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and pre-drill our holes again into the blocks that we have in the stacks. And again, you want to make sure that it's approximately about 1/2 inch away because you don't want the screw to come out on the side and to go on the crooked. So we're going to go ahead and pre-drill our holes on top of the stacks so that way we can go ahead and apply our screws. Now I use a ruler to make sure that I'm not going outside the width. So just like you see me previously doing, I took a marker and I marked the width of the stacks, so to make sure that I'm not drilling on the outside of it. So the same thing here, I'm just using my ruler as a guide to make sure that it's in the center of the stack, so that way it's evenly on there. And then we're going to go ahead and attach it to the other one, apply the wood glue, let it sit, and then we'll apply the other screws once the wood glue sits, and then we'll move along. Now you're probably wondering if the wood glue is going to hold the shelf together. Well, it's not. So I had to go ahead and cut some 5.5-inch blocks that are approximately about 2 inches in width. They might have actually been 1.5, but you can make them up to 2 inches. And I went ahead and cut those blocks, and I'm going to attach them to the frame. So to connect the frame, I cut 1.5-inch and by 5.5-inch block, and I attached it with 2 screws. That way it is centered upon the piece, and it's not solely just holding one part of the frame, but it's supporting the top and the bottom together. I did that to make sure it had really even support. The next thing I did was underneath the shelf, as you'll see, you see me pre-drilling a hole, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to mark my point so I can attach the top last little arch that's at the top that you saw in the picture on the thumbnail, so I can put our display kind of shoe at the top. So what I'm doing is go ahead and pre-drilling, and then I'm going to attach it to the frame. Now, while this piece is not needed, I just thought I wanted to utilize all the leftover wood that I had to build a shelf so I could store the maximum possible shoes that I have, just to kind of eliminate the shoe boxes that I have. So now I'm going through and I'm attaching the last part that I told you that's kind of like arching over the entire shelf. I'm pre-drilling my last 2 holes, and it's going to take about 2 screws to attach it, and then we'll be almost complete with the project, and then we'll attach it to the other last shelf. Alright guys, I hope you like this quick little DIY shoe shelf project. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.